Welcome to the Recovery Road. I'm your host, Scott Cahill, and we're going to be spending the next 30 minutes talking about the cycle of alcohol and drug addiction, addictive behavior, and more importantly, the steps towards recovery. The Recovery Road is brought to you by 449 Recovery. You can find a lot of good information about drug and alcohol treatment and some of the fine work they do at 449recovery.org, and also by calling 855-449-4490. 24/7 our counselors are standing by. If you happen to be watching this show late or hearing it on a podcast, please give them a call. Somebody will be there to pick up the phone and help you with your drug or alcohol problem. Joining us today, we have a special guest, Mr. Errol Smith. Errol was an alcoholic and a drug addict for over 20 years. With Rodney's help, was finally able to find sobriety, and part of the techniques that Rodney used to help Errol are now widespread used in the industry and specialized in with through 449. So can you hear me, Mr. Smith?
I can.
Fantastic. Errol, thank you so much for joining us on the show today. Can you hear me all right?
I sure can.
All right, fantastic. Errol, I'll tell you what, why don't you, let's start from the beginning. How old were you when you first started using?
Well, Scott, I was about 13 years old when I started using. Started using some marijuana and drinking. And I seemed to take to the alcohol pretty quickly.
Okay. And as so you're 13 years old when you first kind of get a taste, and when you had your first drink, like some other addicts, they say once they tasted alcohol, they knew they were addicted, or they knew they had a problem. Was it the similar situation with you?
Not so much. I thought I was just having fun. I mean, at first it was kind of scary because the first time I really drank enough to get drunk, I got really sick, and it upset my mom pretty much, and she got really upset with me, and that wasn't too fun. But I did like the feeling. I remembered that I liked it, and the feeling initially before I got sick, that is. And when given the next opportunity to drink again, I sure took advantage of it. But I didn't really perceive myself as having a problem or being an alcoholic for quite a while. I just thought I was having fun, enjoying a good time with people I knew and like that.
When did you, how old were you, maybe, I guess is a better question, when you realized that you, in fact, were an alcoholic and a drug addict?
Well, you know what, honestly, there were a lot of indications for a long, long time prior to me ever really coming to any realization that I had a problem. The fact is, I mean, alcohol changed my perception of reality, and I enjoyed that changed perception of reality that it's so much that it became an obsession to drink and to use drugs. It became a thought to the exclusion of all other thoughts, including my own well-being or the well-being of others. And it really became the only normal life to me. I didn't recognize it as being abnormal per se or being a problem. I mean, I got thrown in jail for my behavior after drinking or during drinking or using drugs any number of times, but I still didn't see it as being a problem. So, I mean, I was pretty much full flight from reality in that regard. I was probably in my mid-20s once I realized it was a real problem that I couldn't stop on my own.
How old were you when you were first arrested?
Oh, I was 13. I was about 13 years old.
Wow. And when were you arrested for alcohol-related offenses or drug-related offenses?
Sure. There were offenses collateral to that. There were offenses that I committed while under the influence, or offenses that I committed in order to obtain alcohol.
Okay. And even before you started using, I mean, were you pretty much a good kid through elementary school, or were you, not? I'm not judging your character, Errol, but I mean, did you already have some delinquent like characteristics before you started using?
No, really not at all. I mean, I was an A-B student, mostly Bs, but I mean, I was a fairly average or decent student through grade school and junior high, mostly, and so there was really no outward indication that there was going to be any problem or any issues with any kind of delinquency or anything of that nature. It was actually toward the end of my junior high years that I started to really get into some trouble and really start to see some of the damage or some of the consequences of drinking and using drugs as a young person.
Okay.
But there really wasn't anything prior to that. I wasn't very defiant, and I wasn't really very difficult as a youngster.
Okay. Okay. And as obviously at that young age to be abusing alcohol and drugs, as you went in through high school, were you able to graduate high school, and did that affect your progression scholastically anyhow?
Oh, well, certainly. I mean, it precluded my ability to function well at school. I mean, I can't have both. I mean, I can't be under a false perception of reality fueled by alcohol and or drugs and still be available to the academic process. I mean, they just don't go hand in hand. And I started to make excuses that school was just trying to show me things that I already knew. So I decided to quit school at a point after I got kicked out, and then I went to a continuation school, and even then I decided to quit school and go to work. And I had cajoled a company or convinced a company that I was old enough to have full-time employment, and they put me to work. And so I went to school. I went to work instead of going to school. And I would kid myself that I really didn't need school. It wasn't something that was going to be necessary for me. And
if you don't mind me asking,
again,
what were you doing for work once you left high school? What were you doing for a job?
Well, this is in the late 70s and early 80s. I was building custom surfer vans. I mean, I grew up in South Orange. I grew up in Orange County, and not South Orange County, but I grew up at Huntington Beach. And so I built custom vans. And it was. I thought I had a great job, and who needs to go to school? So there you have that. I lost that job eventually and went to work doing something else, and I lived from pillar to post for a long time. My folks would let me into their lives periodically because I'd be doing so poorly that they'd want to be of support to me in some way or in any way they could. My father in particular, and I'd come and hold him and his household hostage for a while until he'd finally take a vote for himself and have to give me the boot. But and I'd have to find somewhere else to be. And it went on like that for a number of years. People could only tolerate my my abuse or my using their good graces for only so long until they'd have to take a vote for themselves, and they would be unwilling to be held hostage to my disease at a point.
Let me ask you, Earl, what type of behavior were you exhibiting that was driving your folks nuts, and how were you acting? There's some people that are the abusive, alcoholics, the angry alcoholics, and then you have the guys that get emotional and cry, and you get other guys that can actually be rather charming. So where do you fit into that mold as far as your alcohol addiction went?
Well, all of the above in some respects. I mean, holding people hostage emotionally and financially to your will is a pretty tricky business. I mean, I was very manipulative, and if it called on, if I was called on to be emotional and be and cry and get sympathy that way, I would. If it was called upon for me to be arrogant and demanding and obstinate, I mean, I'd do that. I was kind of a chameleon. I mean, whatever I thought was appropriate just to assert my will and to get my way, I'd do it. And you know, ironically, I would perceive myself as being very giving and compassionate and caring, and of course, I really only realized or saw through my recovery much later that all the times I was very giving or generous had some kind of a hook in it. I mean, I was always negotiating. I wasn't really just being generous and giving because I could. I was being generous and giving because I expected people to have certain attitudes and behaviors toward me and give me certain privileges that maybe I didn't or did deserve. And so I behaved. I mean, I was a pig, a selfish pig. I mean, quite frankly. And I couldn't even always see that. I didn't see that, in fact. If I had, I might have had to take a closer look at it, but I didn't.
Let me ask you, too, what was your drink of choice? What was your drug of choice? What was the typical Errol Smith day like in the throes of addiction?
Well, it depended on what stage and where I was in my addiction. I mean, I did lots and lots of alcohol. I'm primarily an alcoholic, and my drug of choice was more. And I'd wear out whatever drug I was on or get in enough trouble with it, and I'd go on to something else. Or it would just stop working. I mean, because I did lots and lots of cocaine and lots of heroin and lots of amphetamines and pills and marijuana. I mean, like I said, my drug of choice was more. Anything to get me out of my head. But sometimes they would stop working. For instance, with cocaine, I'd done enough of it where it really wouldn't get me loaded anymore. It just made me feel weird. And weird was no fun, and it wasn't very effective for enjoying myself. So I had to stop doing it and started doing something else. So I did any number of drugs just to try and stay medicated, as it were. Gotcha.
Hey, Errol, we got to take a quick word from the sponsors here real quick, but then we're going to come back and we're going to talk about your road to recovery. You're working with Rodney Robinson and kind of continue with your story. Can you sit tight for a minute?
Great, Scott. You bet I can.
Fantastic. Hold on one moment, sir. We'll be right back with you.
Do you or a loved one have a problem with drugs or alcohol? At 449 Recovery, we are here to help. Our group therapy and outpatient programs are designed to help any substance abuser to live a life in recovery. The nightmare can end, and you can free yourself from the bondage of addiction and get your life back. Call us today at 855-449-4490 or visit us online at www.449recovery.org.
All right, welcome back to the Recovery Road. We're speaking with Errol Smith, longtime drug addict, longtime alcoholic. Errol really had exhibited all the classic traits of someone in the throes of addiction and alcoholism. I guess the first thing I want to ask you, Errol, is I always like to ask, when was your moment where you realized you'd hit rock bottom?
Well, that's a great question, Scott, and it was strange. There was times during the course of my disease, during the course of my addiction and alcoholism, that I'd come to places inside where I knew that I couldn't stop, and I would try to stop, and I couldn't stop starting again. And it seems like I'd come to some sort of a bottom at different points during my disease, but I never really had surrendered. And I came and mind you, I mean, I've told you some of the simple things about my addiction and alcoholism, but I never mentioned any of the places it took me. I mean, I lived on the street in the bushes next to the freeway on Caltrans land for 3.5 years. I died 3 times clinically from overdosing and had to be brought back to life. You know, I was arrested some 40 times in 3 states. I mean, and those are just some of the outward or external indications of an internal condition that I was experiencing, known as alcoholism and drug addiction. And I had progressed to those points, but I didn't hit bottom through all of that. You know, a lot of people think hitting bottom is they hit bottom from going to jail or ending up on the street. And I'll tell you the truth, I was actually up the social scale a half a notch or so by the time I hit bottom. I moved off the street, and I was living with my dad once again. And by the way, he was an alcoholic as well. And so him and I were drinking together and like that. And he kept having seizures. So I'd send him to the hospital, and about the third time he'd had a seizure and went to the hospital, he got sober. And he started going to meetings. Well, meanwhile, I was still drinking. And I went and I kept drinking, and he started pushing me away because he's wanting to take care of himself and really take care of his recovery, and to have me around drinking wasn't going to permit him to do that. I didn't understand that. I just resented the idea that he was pushing me out of the picture again. And,
sure.
and I didn't understand that he was taking a vote for himself. But I'll never forget, once when he was trying to get me to move on, I was out in South Bay in West Los Angeles, and I was out there getting loaded and drinking, and I came to behind a drugstore over in Hawthorne, and I'll never forget, I could feel myself separating from any semblance of the Spirit, any semblance of God that I've ever known. I could feel myself and see myself alienated from any support or anybody that I would love and that would love me. And one more time, I was at odds with myself and everyone around me, and I knew I couldn't stop on my own. Or if I could stop, I couldn't stop starting. And I knew I couldn't go on the way I was, killing myself and hurting everyone around me. And I said, help me. I didn't know who I was saying help me to, but I said, help me. I'll do anything. And I don't know what got into me, but I found some change. I got a hold of some change. I think I panhandled it. And I called my dad and asked him if he could help me find a detox. And he did.
Okay. Was that your first time that you met Rodney? Can you tell us a little bit about how you came to be working with Rodney and the first time that you met him? What was that like?
Well, frankly, I worked with Rodney after I'd been sober a little while,
okay.
And I came to know him. You know, I was in a county-funded rehab in downtown Los Angeles as a 6-month program, and they let me stay for 11 months, which is great because I knew see, I was done trying to use that wonderful mechanism between my ears to give me any direction for my life. And there they had some people available to me that could show me some direction that I could take, that they had taken, that had proven successful. And it was based on the 12-step principles, the spiritual principles of the 12 steps. And they were willing to lovingly show me how to develop and learn to live by those principles for long-term sobriety. And fortunately, later on, I made a commitment to go where my recovery and God placed me. And I didn't know what I wanted to do when I got sober. And it turned out I was supposed to be working in treatment because that's where the doors kept opening up. And even if I would have resisted it, it was unmistakable. There was no mistaking the intention of what I needed to be doing. And so through the course of opportunities and events, I ended up coming to work with Rodney. And Rodney and I worked together for several years as crisis counselors and doing clinical assessment and intake for several hospitals. And Rodney had been a counselor for a long time by then. And so I was very fortunate to be put in an atmosphere and given an opportunity to work with someone with as much experience and with as much passion for recovery as Rodney has. And I've been very, very blessed and graced to have him as a dear friend ever since. And this is over 13 years ago. Well, about 13 years ago.
Yeah, there's probably no better mentor to have than Rodney Robinson, correct?
No, that's absolutely correct. And so he's been a huge blessing in my life. And Susie, as you know, and all of the 449 family now, as they exist, I'm very fortunate to have a relationship with and a part of the process that they offer and that we offer there.
So you say that you're currently working then with people like yourself, helping them get treated for drug and alcohol addiction. Is that correct? What's your exact title?
Well, certainly, and right now I'm doing the insurance coordination for people coming into treatment that need to be able to access benefits so that they might find their own recovery. But I've worked in just about every aspect of treatment, as a counselor, as a crisis counselor, as doing the clinical assessments and education groups and group process and all of the phases of actually of treatment, from admissions to discharge summaries. But I've been working in treatment now for 14 and a half years.
That's great.
So I've been fortunate to work with some wonderful organizations, and I'm now most fortunate to be working with 449. It's been a vision of Rodney's ever since I've known him to provide this opportunity, to provide this process to people desperate and dying from the disease of addiction, so that they might recover and live and be of love and service themselves and carry forth his vision in their lives for the benefit of others, as I've learned to do.
That's great. Hey, we didn't really talk about this before the show when we talked, but now that you bring it up, I know, so you work with insurance. How many insurance coverage programs actually do cover alcohol and drug treatment? Are there a lot of them that will cover that as part of their offerings? Can you talk to us a little bit more about that? I'm sure there's probably a lot of people that, are functional alcoholics, probably know they need treatment but don't quite know how to get started, and if they have a Blue Cross or a Blue Shield or something that has treatment options where that's covered. Is that something maybe you could share some information with us about?
Sure, I think so. Let me answer two parts of that question. First of all, I'll answer the part about the functional alcoholic. I always figure that's an oxymoron or a contradiction in terms. I mean, functioning at which diminished level of their capabilities. but moving on to the insurance question, insurance companies more and more are providing benefit for chemical dependency alcoholism treatment because it is such a pervasive health issue. There's no more ignoring it. Fully 10% of the world's population is alcoholic or addict or has the potential to be so. That's a fairly universal statistic. I'm not just making that up off the top of my head. So that's a big percentage of people that are either alcoholic or addict or have the potential to be so, and they need somewhere to go. I mean, there's nothing vague about alcoholism as a disease killing people and making them very ill, and everybody around them very ill on the way to that. So the insurance companies, all of the major carriers, are providing chemical dependency and alcoholism treatment benefits now. Not all of them, and some of the smaller policies or smaller companies aren't capable of offering that. They just don't have the resources. But most of the major carriers offer resources for chemical dependency and alcoholism. But even if they don't, we're talking about a life-saving mission here. So if there's any resource available at all, it's well spent on saving someone's life in terms of recovery from alcoholism and chemical dependency. Does that make any sense for you?
Well, you definitely helped us sort it out. And Errol, we're definitely running out of time here. But first, I want to say thank you for coming on the show and sharing your story with us. But next, I guess, now that you still work within the treatment industry, how many times is it when you're helping somebody to get admitted into a drug treatment program? Do you see yourself in almost every guy that walks in the door?
Well, Scott, certainly I do. And we share commonalities. We share so much in terms of the internal perils of alcoholism and drug addiction, the anguish, the despair, the isolation, the desolation, the hopelessness. We share so many of those perils. And I show them the way, or at least I hope to get them pointed in the right direction toward overcoming those perils or moving beyond them into a state of hope and faith and a stronger sense of themselves. so that they get to walk through this life with some measure of dignity and grace. But I certainly do see much of myself in every addict or alcoholic that I meet.
Great, that's fantastic. And Errol, once again, you know, our show goes to YouTube, goes to iTunes, goes to all corners of the internet. What do you have to say if there's somebody that was in your shoes, somebody that really needs drug treatment and alcohol treatment? What would you have to say to somebody that that was much like yourself 15 years ago?
I'd say quit trying to use your own ideas to direct your life. Your best thinking isn't doing you any favors at this point. Ask for help and follow the direction of that help that help provides. And stay surrendered. Maintain the state of surrender. It's imperative.
Fantastic. And once again, if you are looking for drug and alcohol assistance, you have a drug and alcohol problem, you have a friend or a family member, by all means, please go to 449recovery.org or give them a call, 855-449-4490. Errol, thank you so much for joining us on the show, and good luck on your continued sobriety and the good work you do helping others, okay?
Yes, thank you, Scott. Thank you so much. Truly my pleasure.
Thank you. Once again, for the Recovery Road, this is Scott Cahill saying good night.